Sakamoto Days has lost its hype and aura. The series is definitely in its last arc, but despite that, I feel almost nothing. No worry for the main characters, no tension, no hype, and definitely no aura, so let's talk about it. In a typical battle manga story, the final arc or the last act is the most exciting part. The plot lines that were established earlier in the story, the characters that were developed over the course of the plot, and the conflicts that had been slowly building up all come to a head as the author brings everything to the table. All the characters with their individual arcs clash, sometimes physically, sometimes ideologically, and most of the time on both fronts, hopefully making for a conclusion that is satisfying from a straight action perspective and also on a narrative point of view as arcs, plotlines, and ideologies are finally wrapped up. Unfortunately, with Sakamoto Days, none of this is happening. We've entered the final arc, and instead of actually focusing on the characters that we've seen for like the past 3 years, we've got 5 random no-name villains that are taking the spotlight for 2 chapters at a time and then getting cooked. Instead of wrapping up plot lines and bringing in characters that actually matter to the story, Suzuki is too focused on padding things with boring-ass fights. I'm gonna hold the hands of all Lu fans when I say this. She should have stayed out of the story. She took the energy and effort of Suzuki's masterful art and wasted it. Was there hype and aura when she jumped out of that van and kicked the cop guy? No! Lu literally has 3 defined character traits, being that she's bubbly, she cares about her family, and she's moody. That's it. The 3 most surface level traits that nearly everyone else in Sakamoto's family has. And the cop guy doesn't even have character traits, he just has one-liners that suggest he's probably crazy. But Suzuki doesn't even have a name for him, so there's nothing to say about his personality. It's this black hole of actually interesting character traits that suck even the hype and aura out of this manga. Sure, Sakamoto Days was never some beautifully written masterpiece, it's no literary classic, and its themes were never so complex or difficult to understand. But at the very least, Sakamoto Days always had its hype and aura. Kanaguri was not a very developed character, but I'd be crazy to say that Sakamoto vs. Kanaguri wasn't straight fire. Part of Gaku's character is that he's supposed to be bland personality-wise, but all of Gaku's fights were hype. But Lu? The cop guy? The wrestler? I don't give a fuck about any of these characters. I don't know the names of 2 of them, and I haven't seen the other one in 2 years, so why should I care if they're getting their climatic showdown now? At the very least, there were small hints of clashing themes that Suzuki had been developing throughout the series. The cop guy represented the antithesis to Lu's view, preferring the life of chaos and fighting over Lu's peaceful store life. However, outside of him saying that one time, there was no significant clash of ideologies. Likewise, Heisuke's fight with Kumanomi and the wrestler had small hints of themes that were shown off during Hyo's fight, namely the value in protecting the weak and valuing community over individuality. But again, this was mentioned at most 2 times, and then the fight ended without a solid conclusion to that theme. There was no wrapping up of plotlines or ideological clashes, and the fights themselves weren't even that great. Suzuki has failed to deliver on all 3 fronts for what makes a final arc have its hype and aura. So looking at it holistically, the reason Sakamoto Days has lost its hype and aura is because the manga is too focused on the nothing characters. Manga is too focused on characters that don't matter and on characters that have contributed nothing to the plot or the themes. To elicit the response of hype and aura, we have to actually care about what is happening. Hype and aura is an emotional response, and if we're devoid of any emotion for these characters other than boredom, we won't feel hype or aura. Sure, Lu versus the cop guy and Heisuke versus Kumanomi and the wrestler had some cool art, but even from a choreography perspective, they were not that great. Some panels were nice, but I'd argue that any of Lu and Heisuke's earlier fights are better than the ones Suzuki just gave us. Heisuke is the only one that got a cool moment in the recent chapters, and that's largely due to the fact that Kamiyate showed up, and Kamiyate is someone who has already been established as someone the audience actually cares for and wants to see more of. And as for the recent chapters, we have some of the JCC students versus Sheena and her brother. Fortunately, Sheena and her brother have slightly more characterization compared to the wrestler and the cop, especially considering Sheena has a name. The problem again though is that we as an audience don't care about Sheena or her brother. The fact that they're from the Kansai School for Assassins makes for a fun reference to Shishiba, but that's it. They each have one set of traits, being that Sheena is impulsive and bubbly, while her brother is shy and insecure. Them appearing in the JCC to fight doesn't elicit any emotion through their appearance alone. Instead, the minimal hype and aura comes from the fact that we get to see some of the JCC students again. I personally really like Natsuki and Mafuyu, so it's nice to see them together in a fight, and I also really like Amane, so I'm happy he's here too. But I'm entirely indifferent to Kaiji and Toramaru. I really don't care that they're here for the fight. Meaning that, out of the 7 combatants that are here, I only actually care about 2 of them, again making any of the artistically impressive or choreographically creative acts that happen in this fight devoid of any emotional impact because they're possibly going to be performed by boring characters. If Sheena does something, it might look cool, but we ultimately know that it means nothing because she's still going to lose, and the same goes for her brother. And on the protagonist side, Toramaru and Kaiji are just about as one-dimensional as the villains of the story, so I don't really care if they do anything now. It's far too late in the story to give them any real development, meaning this fight will also be afflicted with the problem of no hype or aura. So really, what am I trying to say? I'm saying that even when Sakamoto Days wasn't at its peak in terms of writing quality, even when the themes weren't the most complex or groundbreaking, the series always had the hype and aura factor to rely on. The fights were cool because the characters in the fights were cool and did cool things. But now, the series has lost even its X factor, and it's all due to the fact that nobody cares about any of the characters that are participating in the recent fights. In order for the audience to feel a sense of awe, in order for us to really look at a character or a fight and think that it's cool, we need to actually be invested in what's happening. We need to have an emotional response, and when the only emotion we feel towards these characters is apathy, then hype and aura is the last thing we take away from these fights. Unfortunately, the series is too far into the ending to really rectify a lot of these issues, as they've been building up slowly over the course of Suzuki's run, but I do think there are a few small things that can be done to salvage what's left. For one, despite my constant complaining about the current fights and villains, I think Suzuki is doing the right thing by getting them out of the way first. Sure, I don't care about Lu or Heisuke or their fights, but I do care about the rest of Sakamoto's gang, the Order, and the New Order. So by getting all of the fodder out of the way first, Suzuki at least saves the best for last. The next thing Suzuki can do is just go all out with the characters. It's no secret that the writing has been questionable for a while now, so Suzuki might as well just stop giving a fuck. Even if it doesn't completely make sense, just play into the wackiness of Sakamoto Days. Bring back Takamura, make Sakamoto come back in his prime and immediately start throwing hands, bring back Gaku, bring back Tenkyu. These are the characters that the audience actually cares about, and even if the in-story justification is super crazy and wacky, seeing them come back and do cool-ass things would at least give the story its hype back. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know if you completely disagree.